It's time again for this week's edition of Ask Professor Hammock.
That's me.
And remember, he's hung more often than you have.
That's right. Welcome to another edition of Ask Professor Hammock. Sorry we were off the air for so long after that last edition. We had the censors after us, and then there was all the litigation to deal with. But that's behind us now, and we're ready for a new show. We're going to talk today about something called the single ring suspension. It's been getting a lot of buzz over at Hammock Forums, and I have three questions to deal with today. The first one comes to us from Noob, who writes from Crozet, Virginia. He writes, Professor Hammock, I'm a visual learner, and I don't understand all this talk about the single ring suspension. Please explain it slowly and don't use big words. Well, Noob, tell you what we'll do. A picture's worth 1,000 words, so we'll go outside and have a look and see what this SRS thing is and how it works. The single ring suspension brings together some ideas, an old one being of affixing a ring on the suspension line to serve as an anchor so you can bring a line back around and tie it. And the whoopee sling, which is a device that's really fun to make and even more fun to say. Whoopee! In its original conception, the single ring suspension was intended to replace a whoopee sling. So you start off with about the same amount of cord. If you wanted 6 feet of adjustable length, then you'd start off with about 12 feet, a little more than 12 feet, and put in, at one end, a fixed eye. You'll end up having 5 or 6 inches of berry with the fixed eye. You take your hammock, gathered in hammock, put the fixed eye in place, and then bring the cord through at least once. If you bring it through once, then you're going to have some of the cord that's coming off of it be part of the berry. And if this is a whoopee sling, then this is simply length. There's nothing you can do about that. You can't get any closer to the tree than this, and that's even before you get involved with the berry. So with a whoopee sling, you want to bring it around at least as many times as needed to get the berry all the way around the hammock. And I will do the same here, although it's not rigorously necessary. So now we have a piece of cord affixed to the hammock. Now what I've been using for years is to take a ring and affix it to the suspension just by putting some wraps on it. So about 3 wraps will hold it in place. And then what one can do is use the ring as an anchor. So the cord would go to the marlin spike hitch, then back around to the ring, and then I would tie it off using a slippery bunt line or something like
Knots. 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 Knots.
Bone Pile's insight was that the wraps that are around this ring might serve the same function as the berry on the whoopee sling. So we'll actually need a few more of those wraps. I'm going to put 5 in total. And now the idea is to take the working end of the cord and then work it under these wraps. Now I'm going to work it under the first 3 or 4 of these wraps. And I'll tell you why momentarily. And I want to tidy these wraps up. By that I mean I want to have the wraps that are compressing the cord be all together around the cord in one place. And as you can see, that means that there are some wraps that are not involved in compressing the cord, and there's a reason for that. You hang this as you would any whoopee sling suspension, here with an industrial grade marlin spike hitch. Come down to the ring itself. We have the 3 wraps. Now to change the suspension length, I'm going to pull on one side or the other the cord that's between the wraps. Pulling on the far side from the tree, I'm going to grasp the wraps and pull a little bit, and that will cause it to be shortened. To make it longer, grasp on the part closest to the tree and pull. I want to consider now the ease of use of moving the ring along the suspension cord, and so I've loaded up the hammock here with about 10 or 15 pounds of cushions, simulating rather a lot of under and over quilt. Let's suppose now that you've gotten to the tree and you found that the length of cord that you have from the end of the hammock to the end of the loop is not enough. You can make it longer by moving the ring from closer to the hammock, further down the cord, and we'll do that. The question is how easy to do that when your hammock is loaded and you want to keep it off of the ground. So I've got it successfully undone there. Now the happy thing is that when you haven't got the cord wraps pinching the cord, relatively easy to to go ahead and move those wraps along the cord. So I've moved it down a bit. And so now what I want to do is take my working end and work it through the first 3 of these wraps. So there's number 1. Got it. There's number 2. Got it. There's number 3. Got it. All right, what I want to do now is put the loop onto the tree and tighten things up a bit here. And just as you need to milk the berry on a whoopee sling, you want to bunch the 3 wraps together to keep them all in one place. But now I have moved the ring, so I've got a longer span. I'm going to look at some empirical evidence now why it is that I don't recommend that we put this line underneath the last wrap that goes towards the hammock, so that all the compression is done on these 3 loops right here. So this is a cord where it was compressed. You can see the concave impact of the ring on the inside. You see also that it's concave along in here. We have sort of a uniform treatment of concave rounded edge all through those wraps. So here's the alternative. We've used all the wraps. What's going to happen is that right here, coming from the hammock, this is the first wrap that takes the force off of the hammock and around the ring, and that's going to apply it right here underneath of this cord. This now is after the hammock's been loaded, and you can see what has happened is that this wrap pulled away from these cords right here and applied all of the force right on that spot of the cord. So we'll take things apart and see what effect that had. You can see now the impact. Right there is where that last strand that goes towards the hammock put more force and did quite a bit more compression. Here in this section right here is where the wraps are, and we have the concave shapes as before. Compare this with the image from before, and we see that we are missing this very large flat space. That last strand adds more compression and just ought to be avoided. Fortunately, it seems that the compression on the rope seems to self-heal, at least in terms of the shape. I don't know what permanent damage there might be done to the fibers, because when the length is changed and I've hung for a while, then the flat spots have been largely pulled out. This is the same area that we were looking at before, and this is the flat area. And you can see that that has mostly resumed its normal shape. So one last thing that I wanted to say about the effects of compression on the cord is that it makes adjusting this somewhat harder. So if you have been hanging for a while and the cord is really flat and compressed there, then it takes a bit of muscle to pull it out. And if you have another flat spot along on the cord, someplace that you've hung recently, then as you're doing the adjustment and it settles into that spot, then it tends to want to stay there as well, and you have to muscle it through. Right here I just caught on the spot where I was flat before. And so I think that when it comes to uniform of ease in adjustability, then the whoopee sling has the nod here. Well, Noob, I hope that showed you what you needed to know about the single ring suspension. Got another question here, and this one hails from Dutch, from Reinholz, Pennsylvania, and Dutch writes, "Hey Professor, thanks for steering me away from sewing in your latest show. I'm into making hammock bling now that's perfect for the single ring suspension. How about showing me a little love here?" Well, Dutch, I'd love to show you a little love, and tell you the way we're going to do that is we're going to run a comparison of some different bits of bling to see how they all work for the single ring suspension, and if yours is the strongest and the lightest, then that's as much love as you're going to get from me. So let's go back out into the lab. To the scientifically inclined, the natural question is, what combinations of rings and cords will work for the single ring suspension? Have a variety of things to try out. Have an omega ring here. Certainly it will hold. It's massive enough, but will the fatness of it cause some sort of problem? Have here also a cheap beaner. Would be nice if this would work, but will it hold? It's cheap. We have here a small steel ring from a big box store. The question is whether the diameter here, being smaller than the SMC ring, will cause a problem. And last but certainly not least, we have the 2-gram titanium-made microbeaner from Dutchware. And the question is, will that get bent completely out of shape? In terms of cords, we have been testing already the 7/64 Amsteel. We have also 1/8 inch Amsteel, and we have here 2 millimeter Dyneema. So this is substances like Dynaglide that doesn't burn your eyeballs out. So, like the famous scientists who sacrificed pieces of their bodies in pursuit of science, such as Madame Curie and Bunsen, I will do the same by testing these different combinations and leaping upon a hammock, causing various sorts of dynamic stresses, and we will see what will hold.
This is only for the demonstration, not for you to make a try at home, or the classroom, or the neighbor's yard, or anywhere like this. You hear me? Comprende, amigo? Oh, don't make me come over there and put you in a chokehold.
7/64 Amsteel, SMC ring. Leap! 1/8 inch Amsteel, SMC descending ring. 2mm Dynaglide, SMC descending ring. 7/64 Amsteel, Omega ring. 7/64 Amsteel and cheap beaner. Woo!
Don't know my own strength.
2mm Dyneema and small steel ring. 2mm Dyneema and Omega ring. One-8 inch Amsteel, small steel ring. 1/8 inch Amsteel, Omega ring. .7/64 Amsteel, Dutch Wiener. You can see the Dutch Wiener took a little force, and the Amsteel snapped right where it wrapped around, just showing again that there's quite a lot of pressure right there. How's that love, Dutch? Okay, last question today comes from Skeptic, who's writing from New Jersey, and Skeptic says, "Dear Professor Hammock, I don't get all this SRS talk because I don't think an extra 1.5 foot smaller minimum hang distance is such a big deal. How about applying some of your university learning to looking at that question?" Skeptic, that's a really good question, and we're going to answer that question by going back out into the lab, but not the Hammock lab. We're going to go to the computer lab and do a little simulation. Advanced research in computational hammock science calls for the use of extensive computing capabilities such as we have here to test theories and evaluate designs before you go to the tree so you can do so with confidence. After all, it's all about safety. We can use these same resources to address Skeptic's question. We'll do that by building a simulation model of trees dispersed throughout a domain and directly measure the benefit of the SRS as against the whoopee with respect to the minimum span distance. And we'll do this then using the model and evaluate scenario after scenario after scenario and get an overall feel for just what that benefit is. So to understand what's going on, let's go to the whiteboard and I'll walk you through the model. Let's do a computer model of the following. You're at the end of a long day of hiking. You see a copse of trees and you want to hang. So I have a mathematical representation of a copse of trees. Let's say that it's a square that's 100 feet by 100 feet, and I have placed in here a number of trees. And for every pair of trees, I can ask the question, can I hang here? Well, so the constraints on can I hang here are, one, that it not be too far apart, and so we'll say that 20 feet is the maximum distance between trees. Two, that they not be too close together, and so this is where the whoopee sling and this SRS differ, and so in this analysis we'll assume that the SRS can hang between trees that are 10 feet apart and the whoopee sling 11.5 feet apart, 1.5 feet of difference. And then one last constraint is that we can't have too much in the way. That is, that we need to have clear space between those two trees to hang the hammock. So I'm going to require that there be 4 feet of space across between the endpoints of those trees. So there can't be any trees in this rectangle. So one question you could ask is, how many more hanging spots are there using an SRS than a whoopee sling? And you could go through and conceptually and count them all, and you come up with something like 10% more sites using the SRS than the whoopee sling, but that's the wrong question. All you really want is one place to hang. And you think of it from that point of view, then with all of these trees, at least there's enough density, with all of these trees, chances are overwhelming that you're going to find one hanging spot, and so what's the deal? So let's make the problem a little harder, or maybe a little more realistic. You have a copse, but there's a place in that copse where you'd like to build a campfire. You have a copse, or you have a friend that's there already, and you want to hang near that friend. And furthermore, there's a storm coming up, and so you want trees that are oriented a certain way. So what we would like to do is estimate the probability that if you pick your favorite place in this copse and orient your tarp the way that you want it, then you could find a place. And the analysis that we can do there is to say, if I randomly choose some point in this domain and consider all trees that are within, say, 10 feet of that point, do any of those trees serve as the base for a pair that are legitimate? That is, they're not too far apart, not too close, and they have all the space that's needed between them, and it's oriented within 20 degrees of my favorite angle. So for a given point, I can ask the question, can I hang here under those constraints using the SRS? Can I hang here using those constraints using the whoopee sling? And so I can ask that question for this spot, and I can randomly choose another spot, and I can ask the question there, and I can randomly choose another spot, and I can ask the question there, and based on all the answers that I get from these random selections, I can estimate what the probability is that if I randomly choose a spot in here, finding a pair of trees that can hang from in the orientation that I want within 10 feet. Okay, but that's for that particular given copse. I would like that probability in a more general sense. And so this is where we bring in all of the computing to do extra simulation. Because for a given density of trees, and I'll consider 10 trees in here all the way up to 500 trees in here with shades in between. For a given density of trees, what I want to know is what is that probability over a space of many, many possible copses. In the computer, I can compute many, many different copses simply by starting with a clean slate and plugging in the number of trees that I want, and with every tree randomly choose an x-coordinate, randomly choose a y-coordinate, and what that will do is place trees in this domain randomly in some kind of uniformly distributed sense. So we'll crank up the computers now, and for every density of trees, we'll do thousands of instances of copse and analyze each of them and use all of this information to come up with the estimated probabilities. And then we will see just where the chips fall. I've written a program to display each copse and the legitimate hanging spots you find in it. Again, legitimate means between 10 and 20 feet between the trees and 4-foot width free of other trees. These black rectangles are those that are legal for both the SRS and the whoopee sling, and the green triangles are those for the SRS only. For each copse, we want to compute the probability of being able to hang in a random spot within 10 feet at a given orientation within 20 degrees. We'll denote the probability of being able to hang there using the SRS by PS, and the probability of being able to hang there using the whoopee sling by PW. We'll then take the average of these over many copses as a function of the number of trees in the copse. With only 10 trees, the chances are very low for both methods, and the chance of finding a spot anywhere is not very good. With 50 trees, you'll probably still need to do some searching. The chance of hanging just where you want is only about 15%. Find a copse with 100 trees, and about 40% of the time you'll be hanging at your chosen spot. But find a cozy woods with 250 or even 500 trees, and you've got a nearly 3 out of 4 chance of hanging at your first pick. The woods get dense, though, with 750 trees, and the probability of your first pick working drops to 1 in 2, because the density increases the probability of trees showing up in the hang area rectangle. When you have 1,000 trees, you may need to pack in a titanium chainsaw to hack your way through to a randomly chosen spot, and then you have less than a 1 in 3 chance of being able to hang there. At the end of the day, there's not a lot of difference between the two methods. If you have a low density of trees, you're not going to find a site that has the orientation that you want. When you have a high density of trees, you have over half of a chance, but the difference there perceptibly are not large. You either find your site on the first try or you don't. So what that says is that if you hang in the mathematical universe of uniformly distributed trees, then there's not a lot to be gained by the SRS or the whoopee sling. So then, that's a wrap on the SRS. You know, Bonepile had a really clever idea with this, and it's been fun to think about and fun to play with it. But that all said, I'm going to stick with other ways of hanging my hammock. The SRS is not unique in the advantages that it offers over the whoopee sling. There's a temptation to use things on it that are not meant to withstand the stresses stresses that you have on the main suspension line. Dutch would be the first to tell you that his titanium microbeaner is not meant to be used in the way that we did. That was just for show, just to make it bend. Sorry, Dutch. I don't know what the impact of the crushing of that cord is. I do know that cord's not designed for that, and so that just raises a question, a risk in my mind that I needn't take, and so I'm not going to take it. But for those of you that do use this, be careful out there. Use only climbing rated things on your main suspension line, and never hang your hammock any farther off the ground than you're willing to fall. So with all that, this is Professor Hammock signing off until next time, and keep those cards and letters coming in.
Don't make me come over here and put you in a chokehold.
Nuts! 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 Nuts!